Hey ladies and gentlemen, Chris of the Polish Geek, and welcome to a video game review of Baldur's Gate 3. Because Baldur's Gate 3 was a phenomenal game, for the most part, and I still remember how I played the first Baldur's Gate in my childhood. The game came out like 1998, but I remember I played it like later, like in 2003 around, I believe, because I played it when I was in like 3rd grade. And I have so many fond memories of this game. I sadly missed out on the second game, but I do remember how much I loved the first game, and I remember my fond memories. I have so many fond memories of it. And this third, Baldur's Gate 3, it basically brought me back to my childhood and how much I loved the first game. I generally love RPGs. RPGs is one of my favorite video game genres. And I totally think Baldur's Gate 3 deserves to be honored among the likes of Masterful RPGs like all the Witcher trilogy, Skyrim, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Knights of the Old Republic, you name it. I totally think that Baldur's Gate 3 deserves to be honored among those other Masterful RPGs. And like all those other Masterful RPGs, it has a fantastic story, well-written characters, great gameplay, and everything I think a good RPG should have. But it also has plenty of choice, like RPGs should have, but I really think Baldur's Gate 3 truly goes above and beyond with the choices and various things you can do in the game and how you want to play it. So, let's dive in. You start the game just like the first Baldur's Gate, and a lot of other Western RPGs. You can choose what race you want to play as. You can be a halfling, or an elf, or half-elf, or even dragonborn, possibly inspired from Skyrim. I generally choose a human. And on my very first character creation, I didn't notice it, but I did notice it later. I generally don't really like getting so deep into it, but I can't say very much that I'm very fond of being able to customize your body, and like you can choose a female, but then you can also kind of give your character a beard and still adjust the male body. It seems like it's a virtue signaling. Can't say I'm very fond of that, honestly. So yeah, I'm not the overall fan of character creation, but well, thankfully, I can look past it, because thankfully, once you start playing the actual game, there is not much virtue signaling on anything. Actual game story is a fantastic story with great, well-written characters. So yeah, once you can get past the little cringy character creation, you have a wonderful game with amazing gameplay, storytelling, and awesome complex characters. The game is split into 3 acts. I really love the change in tone to each act. Act 1 is very classic fantasy like the first Baldur's Gate or its spiritual successor Dragon Age Origins. But Act 2 suddenly turns to a dark fantasy horror with all the twisted monsters and all, and it kind of gives me Dark Souls vibes. Third act goes back to classic fantasy, though with its politics and scheming. It can give you vibes of The Witcher or Game of Thrones. The prologue itself is already very interesting. It really hooks you into the game. You get infected and the first thing you wanna do is find a way to get cured of your infection. Later, the story becomes much richer and deeper than that. And since you are free to give different decisions to make, it almost feels like you're part of writing the story. You don't just feel purely like an explorer. You feel like you're both an explorer and an actual writer. In some ways, it feels like you are thrown right in the middle of this fantasy world of Dungeons and Dragons. On your journey, you get various different companions. I know I haven't gotten them all, actually, because of the choices that I made during the game. But if anything, it gives the game a gigantic replay value. In fact, I certainly am planning on replaying this game soon with an entirely different character and make very different choices on my second playthrough. Among the companions there is Shadowheart, and her backstory is so interesting. I actually romanced her. I heard most players did actually. She undergoes through amazing character development, and I know that depending on different choices I make, her character could go in a very different direction. There is also Will and Gale. They also both have very interesting backstories of their own. I actually found Will kind of boring and annoying at first, but after I was learning more about him and helped him reconnect with his father as well as free him from the pact with the devil, I couldn't imagine not having him in my party. There is also Vampire Astarion, who in both appearance and backstory kind of gives me vibes of Fenris from Dragon Age 2. I know there are other companions like Karlach, who I heard is a huge fan favorite, but sadly, because of the choices I made in the game, I didn't get her in my team. Maybe on my next playthrough. However, the depth and the complexity all those characters are given is so rich, and the conversation with those characters and learning more information about them and getting to know them, it can be far more interesting than fight or exploration. Much later in the game, you might have to do some really tough choices that involve your companions. Of course, depending on the choices you made prior in the game, you might not always have to be faced with those tough choices. In general, what this game does so uniquely with your companions is that they aren't just your friends and people who accompany you on your journey. Their stories and character arcs are very strongly linked to the main quest. They are almost as important as the player character. In fact, it is optional to actually play whole game as one of those companions, even if I personally decided to custom my character. That said, I do not rule out the possibility of actually playing at some point as one of my companions and see the whole story from their point of view. And also, some famous characters from the first Baldur's Gate game return in this game, like Jaheira, for example. I remember her clearly that she was one of my companions in the very first game. Don't know where her partner Khalid is, but whatever, you can't have everything. And there is also Sarvok Anchev, the main villain of the first game, and his return was so welcome, and he looks so awesome now with the updated graphics. I love his armor, and now that with the updated graphics it's so much more detailed and visible. I admittedly heard that he was actually redeemed in the second game, and plenty of fans were understandably not very happy with it, with him back as a bad guy. But oh well, I haven't played the second game, but the boss fight with him here was pretty awesome, and I also love the way his connection to one of the new villains in this game, but I won't get very deep into it. You have to play to find out. Like many other RPGs before it, Baldur's Gate 3 is filled with side quests, which all could totally work as their own self-contained stories, kind of like in The Witcher 3. Like many things I was saying about The Witcher 3 is that many of its side quests could totally work as their own self-contained, rich, well-written stories. And I have to say, Baldur's Gate 3 does exactly the same thing with the side quests. Whenever I would get a new side quest, I would just leave the main quest to pursue another awesome, interesting side quest. There is one side quest, for example, where you have to investigate the murders at Baldur's Gate, and you have to look for clues and find the killer. This is so much fun, because I really love investigating in RPGs. The game is very overwhelming, but it is magnificent. And I know still that my way of playing the game is just one of many, and I totally consider restarting the game again soon with a different character and make entirely different decisions. Although, because Assassin's Creed Mirage just came out, I might have to wait a little bit and now start playing that. Another thing I love in Baldur's Gate 3, and this is something I tend to love in RPGs in general, is how you are given a choice. I have been talking about it quite a lot already, but as I said, this game really puts emphasis on choice, and depending on what you do, the game can tell an almost entirely different story. Yeah, depending on the choice you make, your journey can turn out very different. It's still loosely very similar with broad strokes, but with details so different, then Yeah, it's almost like an entirely new story, and you can make choices as early as the beginning of the game. It really goes above and beyond with that, because in Dragon Age, for example, while you can make choices, they are limited. In The Witcher 3, some choices can totally change the ending of the game, but in Baldur's Gate 3, different choices can lead to very different experiences and scenarios. I, for example, once accidentally killed somebody whom I wasn't supposed to kill, and as a result, I was locked out of completing my mission. And gameplay is also a lot of fun. Combat is pretty unique, while the whole game is very much a Western RPG. Combat kind of feels like an Eastern RPG. It's turn-based. I do like turn-based combat. I love real-time combat too, but in this game I thought turn-based combat fit very well. And I really loved it. Different characters would use their different abilities and to defeat enemies. It was actually a pretty challenging combat at first, but with getting used to it, it becomes really awesome and plenty of fun. I love how in this game when you defeat enemies, bodies don't even disappear. They stay there for the rest of the game and they don't even disappear later. When you return to the same spot much later in the game, bodies of enemies you slain will still lie there. That's also something I remember about the first Baldur's Gate actually. And fun fact about this game also, I actually played it on my PC because I'm generally more of a PlayStation guy, but Baldur's Gate 3 I actually played on my PC. I think this is one of those games that fits much better on the PC. I heard from a lot of people that this game almost plays like a tabletop Dungeons and Dragons, which makes perfect sense considering it takes place in the same universe as Dungeons and Dragons. I believe it's called the Forgotten Realms. The rolling of the dice, for example, and having even more choices than most other RPGs. I never played tabletop Dungeons and Dragons, even though I always wanted to, and had friends played around, but for some reason never got joined in. So, but I will take people's word for it when they say this plays like a tabletop Dungeons and Dragons. Baldur's Gate 3 is a brilliant game with awesome lore, great story, complex and well-written characters, and overall, if it wasn't for the kind of cringy virtue signaling during the character customization, the game would be perfect. And also, this is one of those few games where I actually played on my PC, because I am generally more of a PlayStation or Nintendo guy, but yeah, Baldur's Gate 3 is one of those games, like Skyrim, that I actually played on my PC, upstairs in the attic, in the trailer reaction room. And also, I really now want to replay the first Baldur's Gate, and maybe even play the second one too, and they are both on Steam, so I totally have the option to do that. And that speaks volumes of how awesome the game it is. If it really now if it really now makes you want to revisit past games from many years ago, it speaks how masterful the game must be. Because as I said, I literally now want to play the first two Baldur's Gate games or restart a game again with an entirely new character and do entirely different choices. Although now I'm about to soon start playing Assassin's Creed Mirage because it just came out, so I'll probably have to play that instead and review for you guys. But overall, Baldur's Gate 3, phenomenal RPG, makes me now want to play the previous two games or maybe even restart this game with a new character. But here are my thoughts on Baldur's Gate 3. Phenomenal game. And thank you for checking out this video. Press the like button, please subscribe this channel, and I'll talk to you soon in another video. Talk to you later, bye!